Three-star Dre Pollard is coming to Washington.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into a special bonus edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I'm coming at you with this special bonus episode because Washington has earned a commitment from three-star athlete Dre Pollard from Ed W. Clark High School in Nevada. And this is a kid I'm really intrigued with. He's coming off a recent visit to Stanford, but took his visit to Washington on May 30th, and that's when the crystal ball started to roll in. So I had already watched his film, and I really liked what I saw from him, and I decided to do a real deep dive. Because for a very long time on the show, Lars and I talked about Dre Pollard as a cornerback command, or as a defensive back, as all the everydayers know. But it seems like he's going to end up playing running back, at least to start. I'll get into, some of the other positions that he could end up playing later on because of just his athletic potential. But I feel like he is going to, at the very least, start his career at Washington as a running back, which definitely impacts the recruitment of four-star running back Brian Bonner from Valencia High School in Southern California, who seems like just a very physically ready to play prospect, which could end up being the reason that, in my opinion, he ends up at UCLA. Something to keep an eye on there. But with Brian Bonner, I think this is a really nice addition for running backs coach Scotty Graham and this entire Washington coaching staff, because you can look at him in a very similar light to what when he came out of high school, he was a four-star running back Jordan Washington is, and what we saw from him in very limited snaps last year, where this coaching staff was very willing to find different ways to get the ball into his hands and just utilize his speed and his athleticism in open space. And I feel like that would certainly end up being what the plan is with a guy like Dre Pollard moving forward, because he's somebody with truly elite speed. He doesn't have the 4.2, whatever it is that I believe that Jordan Washington has, but it's certainly right there in that ballpark. He ran a 4.37 at the Polynesian Bowl Combine earlier this year. And as somebody who you line him up in the backfield, you want to run some outside zone sort of stuff with him and just get him outside the tackle box and get him into space, you can do that. Like I said, you can just bring him across the formation on jet sweeps, fly sweeps, different things like that, and just find ways to get the ball into his hands and let him run, which is something that I think is a really fun change of pace in the Big Ten, because I feel like you don't see a lot of that in terms of, you look around the conference. There's just so much power run, and I think that's one of the interesting things that this Washington coaching staff is sort of building this offense into. It's something that Scotty Graham talked about with us back in April, where he said, yeah, we really do like to recruit these two different types of running backs, depending on the flow of the game, depending on what the game plan is, what the defense is showing us, what the defense might have, and just in terms of personnel as a whole. And we've got guys that can run through you, and Adam Muhammad, a Jordan Coleman, a Julian McMahon in that same sort of light. But we also have guys like Adam Muhammad can do this very well, but Jordan Washington and a Quade Carr who can also just run around you. And you have a really exciting downhill running back in Ansu Sanoe, who's been committed for over a year now. So you really just need to find somebody who can complement his skill set very well in the thunder of lightning sort of mold. And that's something that Dre Pollard can do very well, because you look at what he brings to the table, what he was able to do as a junior at Ed W. Clark, where he's teammates with offensive line commit Dominic Harris. And he had 1,275 total yards last year, both as a running back and a receiver. And he had 12 total touchdowns, and is somebody who, I mentioned the 4.37 speed. That's not all he brings in terms of long speed. He was the reigning champion in Nevada in the 100, 200, and 400 meter dash. That's somebody with truly elite potential. And it's something where I know a lot of people are going to look at this and say, oh, he's a three-star athlete. Why not always try to go after the four-star guy? And it's not that Washington is not going after these higher tier recruits. This is something where he's just such a seamless addition to this offense in so many different ways that if you can take a guy like this, you absolutely have to do it. And you can figure out the rest later in terms of, again, what position he's going to play, how he's going to fit in this offense, because you can use as many Swiss Army knife sort of pieces like a Dre Pollard as you possibly can. Because if you need him to catch the ball out of the backfield, he can absolutely do that. If you need him to just line up and be a guy who's going to get 10, 12 carries out of the backfield for you, he can do that as well. You need him to line up out wide. He could probably do that too. So I look at all the different things that he can bring to the table, and I think that this is somebody who certainly has the ability and the high-end potential to make a major impact in this offense. And you go and you look at the 247 Sports rankings. I think he could end up getting a bump to being a 4-star prospect by the end of the cycle if he does end up having a strong senior season, because he's ranked as the number 41 athlete right now in terms of the 247 sports rankings, and the number 3 player in Nevada, actually ahead of his teammate Dominic Harris, who is just still blowing up on the recruiting trail. Probably is going to end up with 40, 45 offers by the time the signing day rolls around in December. But I look at everything that Dre Pollard has, and he is such an exciting player in terms of what he brings to the table. One of my favorite things with his film, and I feel like I have to bring this up every single time that I watch him, is there's one of his first few plays on film where you look for guys that aren't just a one speed runner, where it's always nice when somebody with top end speed can just get outside the tackle box and you're outrunning every single defender, but it's guys who have that extra gear that they can shift into. And that's something that I think Dre Pollard displays really, really well, where there's one play where he breaks into the secondary. He's got to run up the middle, and there are 3 defenders that are all closing in on him from different angles. And he recognizes that and then just kicks it into a higher gear that those guys just don't have, which, part of that is just high school football, but they don't have that extra gear, and he's gone, and it's a 60, 65-yard touchdown, something like that. And that's one of the really exciting factors. And it's something where this is a guy who he might not get onto the field early on in this process, because I look at Washington's running backs room, and, the future is Adam Muhammad. The future is Jordan Washington. And we'll see how guys like Ansel Sanoe, Julian McMahon, Quade Carr, and now Dre Pollard will end up fitting into that. But it's something where maybe he can find his way onto the field early as a return man. And there are just different ways that you can utilize a guy like this and find ways to make it work. And it's really intriguing, and maybe at more position than one. And we'll get to that right after a message from our friends over at Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save more. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. Talking about the versatility of Dre Pollard is really interesting to me, because it's something where, let's start at wide receiver, since we're staying on the offensive side of the ball here. He has all the skills to wind up at wide receiver with the long speed. He's got a really nice frame at 6 foot, 170, 175, somewhere in that ballpark, to just end up at that position if need be. And again, with that long speed, you can have him line up outside and stretch the field. But it might not be necessary, especially when we look at where Washington sits in this class right now. We'll have way more on this over the coming days, but as you look at guys like Mason James, Daniel Odom, Vance Spafford, Madden Williams, and where Washington might sit in a recruitment with at least a couple of those guys, you don't necessarily need to just ask him to play wide receiver right now. If you end up missing out, like a couple of those guys don't end up wanting to flip or anything like that, and you get to November, December, and you want that to be the case, you can find a way to make that work. And I feel like you can say the same thing at defensive back. And I want to get through just all of the different little recruiting things before we get into just why Dre Pollard is so good at each of those positions and what makes him really impressive and a truly high-level athlete. Because at corner, Washington is doing very well on the recruiting trail. And, you look at the crystal ball that's out to Derek Johnson II. Another crystal ball for Jaron Jones came in as I'm recording this on Monday. But you look at all that and you say, Dre Pollard could also be a guy who ends up there because he's got really great eyes at the position. He breaks on the ball really well. And having just a guy with that level of speed who can stretch the field with an opposing wide receiver who might be able to just, do the exact same thing. It's all really nice to see, because you can just have a guy like that and, again, work it out later, like I said earlier, because that's one of the really important things just in the recruiting world in general. When you have somebody who can legitimately play multiple positions if you wanted him to, you can figure everything out once he gets on campus, once these guys enroll, once this class shapes up the way that it does. And I think that's a really good sign with where Washington sits with guys on both sides of the ball, where you can take this guy and say, hey, right now, we want you to wind up at running back, but with, the releases that you have and everything that you can do with your lower half, with your feet, if you end up a wide receiver, hey, we're not going to complain about that down the line either. And if you end up at corner, hey, we like that as well because you have that kind of athleticism and everything that we look for at that position. And when I look at wide receiver, I think that would be a lot of fun because I just look at how Jedd Fisch has utilized guys like this in his offense. And I feel like we always end up coming back to the same set of names, whether it be Jacob Cowing, Giles Jackson, somebody who can line up inside and out and find ways to get releases off the line of scrimmage. And I think that's something that Dre Pollard does very well when you watch his film. I don't think it's, his primary skill as of right now. I think that's something that is better suited in the backfield, but it's something that should be considered because it's really interesting. And it's something where you don't know how that's going to end up 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the line, assuming he's in the program for that long. So you might as well just find ways to make it work in the short term. And it's why I mentioned finding a way to get him on the field early as a kick returner if possible, because if you have somebody with that level of speed, why not find any possible outlet to get him to the field? And if it works there, great, that's fine. And you can find ways to utilize him on your offense, or again, if he ends up on the defensive side of the ball, utilize him over there as well. And that's really exciting. So I really like what this commitment says about where Washington stands with the rest of its class, because I mentioned some of the guys at wide receiver, some of the guys at cornerback. I wanted to sit there on the defensive side for a minute because that was what we originally expected him to commit to play. So I look at some of these other guys that are currently in this class. You got 4 commits right now. You've got CJ Lavender, Kasani Giles, Elijah Durr, and Gavin Day. So you've got a really nice class going in the secondary. So it's fine that, which is probably one of the biggest reasons why he ended up being prioritized as a running back, because you're feeling so good about that. Because you look at the guys that are out there, again, Jaron Jones, Derek Johnson. And then on top of that, now that you've got an official visit set up with Devon Benjamin, Brandon Arrington was on campus, Celeste Moa, whatever's going on in that recruitment as well. There are so many guys that you're in on. You just take the talent, you take the athlete, and you let everything work itself out down the line. And that's something that I'm really intrigued about. And I think Washington has done such a great job of doing since Jedd Fisch and the staff got to campus. It's been one of Jedd's biggest things, and Mars and I have emphasized it on the podcast several times. Washington is not in a position to turn down talent, and they never will be. You're never going to hear, oh, yeah, it sounded like this guy might have ended up at Washington, but the coaching staff told him to hold off, and he ended up elsewhere. That's not something that this coaching staff is currently in a position to do, and I don't think it ever will be as long as it winds up here. So having someone like this on your roster is a really exciting thing to think about because of just all the possibilities he provides. If there's any one thing that I want you to take away from this, is that Dre Pollard gives Washington so many possibilities down the line on offense, on defense, on special teams. He is somebody who you take and you figure out the rest later, because there is so much high-end potential there that you certainly want to find a way to see that through. And if you trust your development, which we know full well that Jedd Fisch trusts Scotty Graham, John Richardson, Kevin Cummings, all those guys to be able to do at a very, very high level, you can find a way to make it work with a guy like Dre Pollard. With that being said, I'm going to jump out of here today. Thank you so much for tuning in. And if you want to make sure you're up to date with all the special edition, bonus content, everything like that we're pumping out here on this channel, please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So please make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you don't miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next time.